Okay, cool.
Okay, over to you.
Okay, now that I've practiced it, my screen looks slightly different having an extra person on here, so just give me a second. And I want to do share desktop, yes. And then, okay, so I'm just going to start. I've just got a sort of a PowerPoint that I'll run through. It's going to kind of be the background to my discussion. So I will get that up and running. It just starts with a little introduction movie because I like to play with things. So it's not of a high quality, but I'll get it started. Okay.
Very cute.
Okay, it was very dramatic, possibly overly dramatic for the amount of information I was actually able to find on the topic. So basically my pitch is looking at, and I've mentioned it to you before, but looking at digital authentication online versus identity verification in person. It's looking at the safety and protections around each of them, the laws around them, and predominantly obviously focused on digital authentication online. I guess that's kind of the focus of my thing, is just to be looking at that comparison. So that's the main idea. Now, I have drawn up a sort of a little bit of a plan on Coggle, which you suggested. I wonder if this will miraculously bring it up without killing off everything else. Okay, so I got this started just as a really basic idea of sort of, I guess, ways of finding the information was using examples. So going with, so authentication online, I thought, okay, well, let's have a look at ANZ and what they do, just as an example, as a starting point, because I was finding it a little bit tough. Like there's no, online authentication act, so it's not that straightforward. So I went into them and had a look at their they've got their own privacy policy, and that was probably the big document that they sort of guided you to, I suppose, to explain what kind of information they're taking, how it's protected, how they're going to use it, and that was probably the focus. Sort of was how they're actually going to use your information. Didn't necessarily make me feel particularly confident that my information was safe, but they focused on that. I have referred to sort of acts that they referred to within that document as well. I've also looked at government departments. So I've basically looked private sector and public sector just as a comparison. The private sector sort of seems to probably be a little bit ahead of the public sector. But the government, I suppose I'm working within that at the moment and seeing the transformations that we're going through. So I'm kind of experiencing that firsthand, and it's interesting to see the differences between in-person versus online. And yeah, there's a few interesting things that have been going on that I'll discuss shortly. So that is the Coggle. So yeah, the idea was that people could hop onto that and add extra little branches off if they want to. So if anyone does get on board of that. Okay, so basically the base knowledge that we're looking at. So what do we already know? A lot of, basically, I suppose with regard to the reading that was given to us, a lot of the information we're looking at is the coding side of it, the technical side, and the protections that are set up in that regard. And I think that's another thing that I kind of wanted to go through is, what is the greater safety mechanism? You know, how much law do we really need if our focus is on the IT side of things? And even if we do have the law, you know, how difficult is that potentially going to be to apply to things? And that's where you've sort of said to look at jurisdictional issues. And that's something I've found hard to find, but it's something I want to sort of delve into, because I think, I think I do really need to consider the technical side and how it's going to relate and interrelate with the law. So now, details so far, that's the whole of the exciting amount of legislation that's been relevant to any of the policies that I've looked at. Privacy Act and privacy principles, pretty straightforward. The Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing Act was not something that I would have thought of, but it actually came up in the ANZ policy, and it was actually related to, you know, any consumer, you know, anyone with their bank. So that one was interesting. Public Service Act, Archives Act, they were with regard to the Digital Transformation Office. So that's, I don't know that there's going to be a great deal within them. Freedom of information, again, probably as obvious as the Privacy Act. Issues. So how is personal data protected? And then that's going back to the...
Just to interrupt you there, I guess the other thing is there may be, in the Federal Crimes Act and the State Crimes Act, there might be specific identity theft provisions.
Okay.
I'm not sure. And at the end of the day, a lot of it's probably covered by generic vanilla fraud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So personal data protection, that's sort of going back to looking at the technical side of things again. So that's obviously something I still want to look into and compare to how it's going to work with the law side. How much information is too much information? How much of our personal data should we be providing to verify our identity online? You know, and I think we've had this discussion before, Scott, about, you know, with regard to civil liberties, looking at, say, for example, you know, MyGov, which is this, you know, one site that draws together all your information from the tax office, from Medicare, from Centrelink, from child support, from, you know, your e-health record. And it's basically sort of giving one link to so much information. And we put a lot of trust in that system that that's going to be safe and that's going to be protected. And I don't know. I'm actually chasing up a bit more information about this and how safe it really is. Trying to get information like that out of the Australian government is kind of like drawing blood from a stone. I'm being CC'd in on emails trying to chase it, and it's just, oh, we'll find out. We'll find out. And I just feel like that's sort of, I think it kind of illustrates the point that we're at with digital authentication, where it is something that's still really, really progressive at this stage, and it's kind of a bit trial and error until, you know, we know what works. And I don't think they're going to necessarily implement more concrete kind of, you know, laws and regulations around things until they know what's actually going to work and what's going to be efficient. So that's sort of my feeling just from what I'm not getting from anyone. How does it compare to face-to-face verification? Well, that's something I just sort of want to look at, you know, with regard to the policy that's applying to how we identify people face-to-face versus what we're doing online. So that one's not sort of too in-depth. With regard to the audience, I would assume that the sort of people that would read about this would be students in IT, law and commerce, maybe small online business operators, if it were something, you know, they were sort of concerned about. This was the Wikia site that I did start. There's not a lot on it because, as I let you know, they blocked me. They did unblock me, which was very kind of them. But yeah, I guess at least I've got a little, you know, I've sort of got an idea of what I wanted to do on there, which I can hopefully transfer across to the Google site once I sort of get my head around what I'm doing to work that as well. So that was, I mean, that's pretty much the basis. And sorry, I'm so convoluted with this. I honestly feel like I know what I want to find. I'm just honestly struggling to find a lot of it. And I think that's why I wanted to discuss with people if they had any other sort of ideas, or if they'd seen something, or, you know, if, you know, when they were doing their research, if they'd come across anything related to it, that they could sort of, yeah.
I think it's the case with a lot of these areas that sometimes it's surprising that people presume there must be law on the area. Yeah. And then when you look at it, it's like, oh, there's actually not very much there. And you often get this with case law. There's a situation where you think, oh, there's got to be heaps of cases on that. And then you realise that the only reason cases exist in this is things go on appeal. And if there's a reason why things have never gone on appeal, then there won't be any cases in the area. So, yeah, quite often you assume the law is kind of fully formed and complex, and there isn't a lot there. And partly here, I think it's because the existing blanket laws like fraud and so on and stealing will generally cover a lot of the things that occur. So if you steal someone's identity and take money out of their account, you can probably just use ordinary law of stealing.
Yeah.
And there's probably also misuse of the telecommunication system and all those sort of hacker laws and things that are involved without there actually being a specific law that's developed around that particular, just about.
Just for that, yeah.
Tort of privacy is an interesting comparison there, actually, because the tort of privacy is a little bit of trespass. It's a little bit of even defamation. It's a little bit of tortious harm. It's all these little bits of other torts. And one of the reasons why privacy hasn't really evolved as a tort is because, generally speaking, another area of tort will generally cover if it comes up. Intellectual property even covers parts of what goes on. So the reason why it's been really slow to evolve is quite often people will go for an alternative and say, well, if it's not privacy, it's this. And there's only a really narrow area of cases where nothing else covers it, and only privacy would. And I suspect identity theft's a bit like that. There's only a really rare number of cases where someone steals someone's identity and does harm that isn't covered by another area of law necessarily.
Yeah.
But, you know, prepared to see how that evolves. I do like your approach of picking examples, because I think one of the dangers of law, as it's often represented, is you have to cover all the bases and go through every single situation. And that's why a lot of law textbooks, for instance, lack a lot of depth, because they'll say, and in this state it's this, and in this state it's this, and this state, rather than actually focus on what the issues are. So I think picking specific examples is a really good way to approach these sort of problems. And you're not pretending that you're covering everything. What you're doing is you're saying these are interesting examples of the different sorts of situations that occur. What else did I think of? Oh, yeah. It also occurred to me that one of the key differences in this area of law between regulation by code and regulation by law is that regulation by code is kind of forward-looking. It's trying to stop things happening before they occur. Whereas law, generally, it's the threat after something occurs. If you break these rules, we'll come along afterwards and we'll do this and we'll do that. So hopefully they mesh together somewhere along the line, that effective prevention is backed up by an effective big stick at the end of the day.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I guess, I was sort of a bit worried how I was going to look at the two of them, but that makes sense.
I think that's how it does. And people say, do you need law if you have this? Well, you do, because even if you manage to catch someone with your really good security and you don't have penalties, then you go, oh, we've caught you. And then like, well, okay, what are you going to do with me? Nothing, because there's no penalty. So you need the penalties to back up the security that you have in the first place.
All right, I'm just going to make notes if that's okay.
Go for it. That's what exercise is about. So I think that's an interesting thing to discuss. It's the complementarity, which I don't think is a real word, but the way in which the code approach and the legal approach do work together. As with many areas, one of the problems with identity theft is the transborder issue. And I believe the EEC is trying to, because they have, I guess, it's much easier to cross borders in Europe physically.
Yeah.
They're probably further advanced than we are in terms of looking at trans-border recognition. And I think Interpol works in that space, because the whole remit of Interpol is to allow different jurisdictions to share information. So I think Interpol might be working in that space. But again, it's less of a legal issue, more of an enforcement issue quite often, because the things that people are doing when they're stealing identities are usually crimes in most places. The problem is the enforcement when someone in Czechoslovakia has found out that someone is doing something, but they're doing it to someone's identity in France and then they're using it in Germany. How do you actually get the different law enforcement bodies talking to each other about those things? And in Australia, it would be the same with the state police, the federal police, the various corruption commissions, and so on, because they don't often communicate terribly well. I used to teach police officers, and they used to tell me terrible stories, particularly in the internet pedophile ring situation, where no one would be communicating with each other, and they would be cracked down on the pedophile ring only to find out that it was actually a different police department setting up a sting trying to catch pedophiles. And the situation was, are there any actual pedophiles involved in this? No, there was just different police trying to catch police. And I think identity theft is a similar problem. So yeah, I think the trick for this exercise, because it's only, as a university assignment, it's relatively small, is to be able to sort of crystallize a lot of those arguments into, nice, simple expressions, and then questions out what are the unanswered questions, what's going to happen in the future, and where is it appropriate? Because usually the way you use references in assignments, you probably will be using links here.
Yes. Yeah.
So you'll be saying, for more about the different forms of security, here's a link to a Wikipedia page on forms of security, or here's
And that's what I'd already started on the wiki, having a link to, Digital Transformation Office and something else that was, So cool. Well, I'm glad I was on the right track then.
Definitely. And the Coggle was great because it really shows the way you're thinking.
Yeah. Well, I actually didn't mind using that. So I was, I didn't know of it before. So,
as someone who does a lot of marking, generally you see where people haven't done something like that because they start off at the start of their essay and then it goes over here and it goes back and then it goes forward, and that's a really nice tool to let you actually see how it all fits together. So, yeah, that looks pretty good.
Yeah. I feel like my ideas are probably still a little bit sort of piecemeal. Like I know the directions I want to go, but every time I think of something, I'm like, oh, but there's this and there's this, and I just need to try and keep it in,
In any, and because working with PhD students, you can imagine how much worse this is with the PhD. An important part of any process is that pruning process where you can actually say, yes, there is all this as well, but that's sitting outside the box and I'm making a decision that I'm not going to cover that. And then in normal essays, then you tend to have to be able to say, there is also this, but this is not central to what I do. I guess with here, you can just put links to things like that. My internet connection is unstable, apparently.
That's all right.
So yeah, I'm quite happy with seeing this evolve. I think the comments, because you can put comments on any particular page through sites, it'll be a good way to give feedback. It's not quite as nice as the feedback on the comments on Google Docs. If you use Google Docs, there's a really nice little comment system there, which the sites just seems to have just a very basic list of comments. So I think it's fine for our purposes, but it would be kind of nice if it had a bit more functionality. Then again, compared to the other wiki sites, there seems to be so much else that Google sites will do. I think it's going to be pretty powerful. Yeah, it's going to do what we need to do anyway. So,
yeah, good. Yeah. Okay, so with with regard to the written part of this assessment, when did you want me to have it submitted to you by?
Well, as soon as you can is best. I mean, technically it'd be like a 2-week time period, but the sooner you can get it to me, the sooner I can give you comments and the sooner you can start working on. So as soon as you're happy with it, yeah, I'd say it'd be 2-week maximum, but you don't want to leave it that long because that's going to put us right to the end of term. So send me what you've got now, allowing a little time to think about it, reflect and tidy your notes up. And then I can give you some comments there. But I will also, as you start putting things up on the wiki site, put comments there as well. So you'll have two forms of feedback. One is what you've submitted to me, and the other is the development as you go.
Yeah. Okay. So I do apologise for my scattered conversation amongst my
No, that's the point.
So
We've both got pet invasions going on.
Oh, I've got dogs over there, and the cat just that cat never jumps up either. It's barely capable.
Yeah.
So I mean, another thing. Sorry, this was just sort of something else I'm sort of chasing up was where because at the moment we're trialling an approach that they're hoping to roll out to whole of government to to verify people's identity. And originally a decision was, and this is all through the Digital Transformation Office, a decision was made that because we had verified people face-to-face with identity and given them a code to log on to lodge a claim, they could then upload photos of their other ID onto said claim online, and we could use that to do the verification. Because, so we did that, and after about a month of that, the Transformation Office came in and said, no, we're scrapping that. They have to show it face-to-face. So it's now gone back to, they have to physically bring their documents in for us to confirm their identity, but we're expecting it to revert back to what it started as. So I've been trying to chase up the basis of that because I find that really interesting. So,
and it seems like it undermines the whole project if at some point you're not going to allow it to be completely digital, then why?
Exactly. And it was it made so much sense the way we were doing it, because basically we had to cite a photo ID in order to give them a code to get onto their online service. So it had to, in theory, it had to be that person. So it's interesting. So I'm just but as I said, trying to get information from people's a whole different story. So
well, everyone's probably really concerned about getting something wrong or being blamed or
that's the feeling I'm getting, is that they're constantly passing it. Oh, we'll pass it to this person and this person. You go, basically, and that's where I feel that there aren't a lot of answers at the moment. It's all a bit of trial and error. Like, we'll see.
I can imagine the backroom conversation. People go, someone sent me an email about this. What's going on? Why are they trying to find this out?
I know. I do probably seem like some covert, dodgy person, but no.
Or someone working, for the Premier's department or something, who's going to, everyone's going to be in trouble if you don't give them the right answer.
Yeah. One or the other. But look, I would love to have a little bit of an answer by the time I submit the final assessment. I have asked them.
Government, I'm not sure. It's only 2 months away.
6 to 8 weeks, and 3 months later, I might get a response.
But interesting, and it's really interesting to tie what you're doing into a practical thing that connects to your work as well. Is rather than some sort of hypothetical piece that's interesting but not really relevant. So it's really good to connect that in. So I'm interested. Kind of interested in the different forms of biometrics they might be looking at too.
You mean fingerprints and things like that?
Things like that, yeah. Because my other laptop has a thumbprint scanner on it, which is not standard issue, but I know if I forget my password, I can use my thumbprint to open it. Although you do have to ask the question, does it have to be a living thumb to access those things, and that's the problem with a lot of biometric things. Depending on how secure you want to be and how important the thing you're securing is, if you can either cut off someone's thumb or you can lift a fingerprint off of another surface and use that fingerprint. But by the time you do that, you might as well maybe falsify a photo and a signature. And I think we also have to bear that in mind when we're talking about security, is at the end of the day, a signature which we use for security for so many other things is so insecure.
Exactly. And that's sort of what I wanted to consider as well. Like, you know, we have this assumption that, you know, it's better to have that photo ID and that signature on a piece of paper, but, you know, is it? Like, it's, you know, people can counterfeit, you know, forge like photo ID documents relatively easily. And signature, I mean, you know, it's, unless you're someone that specialises. I mean, I have to do it at work at times. We have to verify people's signatures against other signatures we have scanned to records. And there was this one woman one day, her signature was different every single time she did it.
Yep.
There was only one tiny point that was the same, and it was just, I had to cite that, which I had to get her to sign a million times and look at all these different documents, and so I agree. So they're the things I want to consider.
And passwords are things that you also use, but then people can forget passwords, or they can give them to someone else, or they can use their favourite football team, which is, or they can use the word password, which is comes up on security lists all the time as one of the most common passwords in the world as password, unless you block. It's a really interesting field, because not only do you have to get the law right, but you also have to get the technology and the bureaucratic structure right as well.
And I think they're probably the primary aspects of it, really. The bureaucracy and the technology. That's, you know, the law's kind of almost subsidiary to them. As you said, it's other stuff, like, you know, it'll relate to what's happened, but it's not the governing. The governing, you know, law. It's not the important bit. So that's where I'm worried. I don't want to go too much off into something else completely, because it's a law subject.
I'm not the most conventional lawyer anyway, because my career has been in human rights and criminology and interdisciplinary stuff all along. So, you know, I find that looking at appeal cases before the High Court is such a tiny piece of the picture that I've always been, I always think that we need to look much more broadly.
And I'm doing jurisprudence at the same time, you know, what is law and what does it really, you know, how does it work? What does it encompass? And, you know, in that regard, I suppose they're just different, you know, different influences on what it needs to do. So,
Okay. Well, is that giving you something to work on?
Yes. Yeah. Probably giving me more things I've got to try and narrow down. But
remember, pruning. It's all about the pruning. And that's probably my. If you were writing a normal essay, for me, the thing that separates the credits from the high distinctions in normal essays is the specificness with which someone has defined their topic. Because often the ones that could have been essays that often end up being credits are the ones where people try and cover too much, and as a result, there's not enough detail or anything. So they're very, very broad. And people do that because they're sort of worried that they'll miss something, or that they can't explain things.
Well, I think that even the ideas I have now, I probably do just need to make a little bit more succinct and cut a few bits out and focus a bit more.
I'm going to be doing one of the projects for myself for the wiki, just to, first of all, so I can figure out how it works, and to give a demonstration of the sort of thing. I'm going to look at censorship. And basically, there's so much in censorship. All I can do is find a few interesting things to put there. So, again, you're not going to be able to cover everything, but you can set up a framework and you can fill in some of the pieces. And hopefully the next time we run e-law, people can come along and go, okay, I can build on that. I can transform that. And that's the idea behind this. Okay.
Cool.
So let me know how you go with sites. I'll do some more work on that and start assigning some passwords to everyone else. So people who've gotten this far, who are listening to the recording, you'll get an email in the next few days with your account details. And yeah, hopefully it'll be an interesting exercise for everyone.
Cool. Okay. Thanks for your time, Scott.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming along tonight.
You have a good